Once upon a time there was a beautiful unicorn named Stardust. Stardust had a flowing silvery white mane and tail, and her coat shone all the colors of the rainbow. She lived with her family in an enchanted forest where magic sparkled in the air. One day, Stardust decided to set out on a journey to explore the world outside her forest home. She packed a small bag with food and supplies for the trip in her mouth. Then, with an excited whinny, Stardust said goodbye to her family and friends and trotted off into the unknown. The forest trail soon opened up into a large, grassy meadow. Stardust paused to happily roll in the tall grass and smell the sweet flowers. She saw fluffy white clouds drifting across the bright blue sky overhead. After crossing the meadow, Stardust entered a new part of the forest. This part was darker and filled with tall, ancient trees. Strange sounds echoed through the shadowy woods. Stardust felt a little scared, but she bravely continued on the forest path. Suddenly, a group of goblins leapt out from behind the trees. They circled around Stardust, pointing and jeering with their crooked teeth. Stardust reared up on her hind legs and whinnied loudly to scare them off. The goblins scampered away into the brush. Relieved, Stardust hurried on her way. She came to a fast-flowing river and stopped on the rocky bank. The water looked cold and rough. Stardust wasn't sure how she would cross to the other side. She carefully put one hoof into the rushing river and pulled it back right away. The water was freezing. As Stardust pondered what to do, she heard flapping wings. She turned to see a friendly white dragon flying down from the sky. "I can give you a ride across the river if you like," offered the dragon kindly. Stardust nodded her horn in eager agreement. The white dragon scooped Stardust up with his claws and carried her across the swirling river. He dropped her gently on the opposite bank. Stardust thanked the dragon before continuing on the forest trail. Before long, the forest opened up to reveal a rocky coastline. Stardust gazed out at the vast, rolling blue ocean that stretched as far as she could see. Seabirds wheeled and called overhead. The fresh salty breeze ruffled Stardust's rainbow mane. After following the coast for a while, Stardust came across a rickety old bridge crossing over a ravine to a rocky cliff. She carefully picked her way across the bridge's rotting planks and made it safely to the other side. At the top of the cliff, Stardust saw a glorious castle in the distance, with many turrets and towers. "I'll stop there for the night before continuing my journey," Stardust decided. She quickened her pace, eager for food, rest, and shelter. But when Stardust arrived at the castle gates, two armored ogre guards crossed their spears and blocked her path. "No ponies allowed," they growled. The ogres laughed rudely as Stardust turned away, rejected. Sadly, Stardust resumed her travels. She wandered into a dark pine forest as the sun began to set. The air grew chill and shadows crept between the trees. Strange night noises filled the woods. Suddenly, Stardust stepped in a hidden snare. Ropes pulled tight around her legs, yanking her up to dangle upside down from a tree branch. She whinnied and kicked in panic. how would she get down? A forest elf stepped out from the trees. He quickly climbed up and cut Stardust free from the snare with his small dagger. "You should be more careful, little pony. These woods are filled with traps for the unwary traveler." Stardust thanked the elf for rescuing her. She told him about her long journey from home. The elf invited Stardust to stay overnight in the small woodland village nearby, where she would be safe. Gratefully, Stardust followed the elf down a narrow, twisting path that led to a tiny village in a clearing. The small wooden huts glowed with lantern light and music drifted through the air. Stardust happily joined in the elves' feast and danced with them late into the night. The next morning, after thanking the kindly elves, Stardust resumed her journey once more. She traveled through the forest for several days and nights. Strange new places and creatures greeted her everywhere she went. But she bravely kept moving forward, determined to explore the world. One sunny afternoon, Stardust arrived at the foot of a towering mountain range. Snow-capped peaks stabbed high up into the clouds overhead. Stardust began climbing up a rocky mountain path, but the air grew thinner and colder as she ascended into the sky. An icy wind stung her eyes and ruffled her rainbow mane. Stardust's hooves slipped on the frozen rocks. She shivered uncontrollably, but resolutely kept climbing up the treacherous mountain trail. Just as Stardust thought she could go no further, a giant eagle suddenly swooped down from a cliffside nest. The huge bird grabbed Stardust in his talons and began carrying her up into the air. Stardust was terrified, but as the eagle flew her over the mountain peaks, she marveled at the breathtaking view. The giant eagle deposited Stardust safely in a warm, sunny valley on the other side of the mountains. Stardust waved goodbye to the kindly eagle before moving on. She felt she was getting close to the end of her long journey at last. Stardust's hooves ached and her supplies were running low. She desperately needed to find food and water. Just then, Stardust noticed a glittering lake ahead. Next to the crystalline water stood a little village of mushroom houses. The mushroom people living there kindly gave Stardust juicy fruits to eat and fresh water to drink. They welcomed her to rest there before continuing her travels. Stardust gladly accepted their hospitality, and soon her strength was restored. The next day, Stardust said goodbye to the helpful mushroom people and eagerly followed a trail leading out of the valley. As night fell, she looked up to see a familiar sight, the friendly forest where she lived. She cantered the last stretch home as fast as she could gallop. Finally, as the moon rose over the forest, Stardust arrived back at her family's home. They excitedly embraced her, welcoming her back from the epic journey she had taken. Stardust was thrilled to be home again after her amazing adventures.